Here's a Twitter thread from Eliza Mondegreen. She posted a screenshot of a tweet from someone called @trans_rage. The screenshot reads, "Trans folks will be dragged from our homes, detransitioned, and murdered while begging cis folks to make a fucking tweet in our defense and be called ungrateful for not thanking the cis person for not actively making things worse. Is it entitlement to want our allies to simply speak the fuck up in our defense?" Eliza Mondegreen wrote, "This is called phobia indoctrination. Phobia indoctrination instills irrational fears in members of a high-control group and uses those fears to manipulate members so they won't question the group's beliefs or try to leave. Here's what phobia indoctrination looks like in the trans community. Telling community members that anyone who questions gender identity or transition, even if from a place of genuine care and concern, hates them, denies their existence, or even wants them dead. This pushes community members, especially naive children and young people, to cut themselves off from friends and loved ones who may question or contradict the trans community, or may simply fail to follow elaborate and bizarre protocols trans communities lead young members to expect. Creating the false impression of a trans murder epidemic, which binds members to the trans community and increases the fear of the outside world out of all proportion to actual risk. No, trans people in the West do not face the same risks as transsexual Brazilian prostitutes." She posts a screenshot of a tweet from Katie Herzog saying, "Anyone who does even a cursory research on the trans murder epidemic quickly realizes that the vast majority of these are not hate crimes. Trans people usually get murdered for the same reasons as anyone else: domestic violence, drugs, random bad luck, etc. HRC won't say this, but it's true." Eliza continues, "Inflating suicide risk and presenting transition as the only alternative to suicide when it comes to dealing with gender dysphoria. This increases desperation to transition, suppresses questions or doubts a person may have, and pushes patients to conceal other issues from doctors." She included a screenshot from New Thought Crime. "The message received is, people who don't use your pronouns want you to kill yourself," which is just not true. But how should a kid in a high-control group know that? Imagine being a teen and thinking that every time your parents call you she, they mean they want you to die. Vilifying and attacking detransitioners as traitors and existential threats to the community, thus demonstrating to current members of the trans community exactly what will happen to them if they step out of line or, God forbid, leave. Teaching community members to bury their own questions and doubts by labeling any uncertainty about gender identity, transition, or community dynamics as manifestations of internalized transphobia that cause harm not just to the individual but to all trans people. The result? Community members gripped by irrational fears, including the fear of freely following their own thoughts, alienated from the outside world by bizarre protocols and unreasonable expectations, constantly self-policing to avoid running afoul of doctrine. Let's be clear about this. No healthy, open, supportive community seeks to terrify and control its members like this on such flimsy pretexts. These are the marks of a manipulative group exercising destructive influence over its most vulnerable members. A healthy, open, supportive trans community would not look or sound like the trans community we've got. It would be honest about the risks trans people face, rather than wildly inflating those risks to instill fear. It would foster resilience and self-sufficiency in gender-questioning youth, rather than telling kids that anyone who disagrees with their worldview hates them, or that exposure to misgendering or dead-naming can lead to suicide. Again, a screenshot from New Thought Crime. If we changed the message to, not everyone will respect your preferred pronouns, and you can't control how people refer to you, but that shouldn't stop you from being yourself and referring to yourself however you want to, would we see a decrease in suicidal feelings? A healthy, open trans community would accept that transition doesn't work for everybody, and that there are legitimate reasons to detransition and exit the community. A healthy, open, supportive trans community wouldn't seek to drive a wedge between gender-questioning youth and their family members or friends who sincerely want the best for them, but question whether transition is the right answer. A healthy, open, supportive trans community would invite ethical research into transition outcomes and alternatives, rather than trying to shut down inquiry, because trans-identifying people deserve the best care available, not just the most ideological, compliant care. And a healthy, open, supportive trans community would encourage young people to explore their questions and doubts openly, recognizing transition as a serious undertaking without fear of censure or expulsion from the group. These toxic dynamics aren't contained within the community either, spilling out into the public sphere whenever any issue that touches gender identity is discussed. It's always struck me as curious that the trans community does not share the needs that every other actual civil rights movement has: the ability to speak freely and clearly and to be understood. Just the opposite, in fact. When it comes to gender identity, no one must speak freely. Everyone must speak in a language that constricts thought and expression alike. The truth of situations must be obscured, not clarified, wrapped in shadows, not brought into light. There's no desire to make the public understand, only to make people comply. In fact, the less the public knows and understands, the better. Generally speaking, if you have a cause that matters to you, if you have something to say, you want to speak as clearly as possible and to be understood. The last thing you want is to wring meaning from language. You can't afford to confuse people. Unless your cause's claims don't add up, that is. I learned this lesson in my personal life first. People who want to be understood try to speak clearly, even if they struggle to find the right words. But sometimes people and causes benefit from being misunderstood. We just need to pee. Nobody is medically transitioning kids. Rights aren't pie. Healthy communities don't behave like this. Civil rights movements don't behave like this. They don't terrify their members by spinning lurid fantasies out of thin air and what would be politically convenient if true. They don't hound peaceful critics into submission. So what is the trans movement exactly? Why does it behave the way it does?